Hi guys, today I'm going to make a video on how to change the rear brakes, wheel bearing, and strut on your 97 to 2003 Buick Regal. These are the tools you're going to need to do the job. You're going to need a chisel, a hammer, a pair of pliers, doesn't necessarily have to be needle nose vice grips, ratchets, an extension, 10, 13, 14, 15 millimeter sockets, and a T30 Torx, some 13, 14, and 15 millimeter wrenches. You're also going to need a 19 millimeter socket to remove the lug nuts to get the wheel off. Okay, after you jacked up your car and securely supported it on jack stands, use your 19 millimeter socket to remove the lug nut in the wheel. The next thing you need to do is remove these caliper bolts. These are 14 millimeter bolts, so you remove them. Now, there's a small rubber bushing on one of these, and it's on the bottom, so just remember that the one with the bushing goes on the bottom. There you can see the rubber bushing on the bottom. Remove your caliper. Set it aside. Now the best way to do it is going to be to tie it up out of the way so it doesn't hang off of your rubber brake hose, but since I'm removing the strut, I'm just going to set it over there. The next thing you need to do is remove this bracket that holds the caliper on. And this is a 14 millimeter. There's two of them. And remove the bracket. Next, you need to remove the rotor. Now this type of rear disc brake system's got an internally sprung pads for the emergency brake. There you can see it there. I apologize for the light, but I'm in the dark corner of my garage. Okay, the next thing you have to do is through these holes beside your studs is there's 4 nuts in here. They're 10 millimeters, and you need to remove all 4 of them using a 10 millimeter socket. Now what I found handy here was once you have them loosened is to use a magnet to pull them out. Okay, now that you have all 4 of those removed, you have to go back here and remove this spring with the pliers, and then down here unclip the emergency brake cable. So I'll do that next and we'll move on. Okay, now after you've got that done, perhaps your car isn't as rusty and disgusting as mine from East Coast Canada, but as you go over here at this joint, you have to separate that to pull the brake assembly and the hub off. So I take my chisel, I put it in here, and I give it a few taps with the hammer, and that'll usually loosen it. So that's what I'll do next. Now, as you can see, with a little persuasion and hitting the chisel with a hammer, I was able to start setting that free. As you can see, I removed the rear assembly. There's one plug for the ABS sensor that you need to remove. It's just 2 clips on either side. Okay, now that we're on the bench, we can remove this emergency brake cable bracket. These are what the T30 are for, these 2 bolts right here. And you have to remove them before you can pull the bearing and ABS sensor out of the backing plate in the emergency brake system. This is what it looks like when you've disassembled it. You might have to get in here with a screwdriver and pry it. I found that mine was really corroded around this edge here. And then once you have it apart, you simply just have to put your new one on, put your plate back on, and then use the 2 screws to put it back together again. Now that I've removed the brake assembly with the wheel bearing, I'm going to move on to changing the strut, or removing the strut. First thing you need to do is remove 2 21-inch bolts, or 2 21-inch nuts. Now there's a spot you can put a wrench in to hold this, but it's actually chamfered inside, so you can't turn this part. You can only turn the nut. And once you get the 2 nuts off, it's too tight to take off by hand. But once you get them removed, you need to bang these out with a big hammer. You don't really need to worry about damaging the end on them because they leave a big spot without threads. So just hit it with a large hammer and they'll pop out the other side unless they're seized. I had one that was really badly seized and I simply had to apply heat here and here with a torch and eventually it came out. The next thing you need to remove is the end link for the sway bar. Now these, if you just put a wrench on this, it will simply spin. So what you need to do is get a 14mm wrench and there's a slot for it on the inside there and that will stop it from spinning. And if I'm not mistaken, that's a 17mm nut. Once you remove that, you need to get up into the trunk area. And I need a light. You need to peel back the carpet. And there's 3 15mm nuts on top. The one in the back, you need to remove that plastic cover. And then you undo those 3 15mm nuts and the strut should just pop out. Once I get all the bolts removed, I'll show you removing the strut. Okay, I made a mistake. The nut up here was an 18mm nut, so you're going to need an 18mm socket for that. So let's see if I can do this while holding it with one hand. One out. 2 out. I'm going to need 2 hands to manhandle this out. And then once this comes out, you just simply need to push the strut forward and it'll drop out and you can pull it out. Okay, now that you've gotten all your rusty old junk off, I suggest you clean out your arm here where your wheel bearing mounts onto. And then I use anti-seize to cover the area so that next time it comes apart, it'll come apart a lot easier. I had to use a wire brush to fill out, or to get all the rust and corrosion out of here. It's called galvanic corrosion. It has to do with 2 dissimilar metals mounting together. So next time, when I have to take this apart, which hopefully the car will be completely rotted to the ground before I have to try and do this again, it won't be so hard to get it apart. Okay, so now we take our 10mm bolts through our access holes and reattach the backing plate, wheel bearing, and emergency brake thing to our wheel hub. Okay, so I dropped my strut in between these two arms, pushed it up, and then I've used a punch to center these holes. So what I'll do next is I'll drive the bolts through these and line them up, and then I'll move to the top and attach those bolts there. Okay, now you just have to bang your bolts through. Add your 21 mil nuts. And then tighten them down. Now you need to get up on top of the strut and tighten your 15 mil nuts. Now I've taken a wire wheel and I've cleaned up this hub face. Cleaned all the rust off of here so that the rear disc sits on it better, and also so I can put anti-seize on it so next time I need to take it apart I don't have to beat them off with a hammer. Under here is our adjuster, and you want to adjust it down to tighten it and up to loosen it. So now I'm going to add some anti-seize to the front. Then I'm going to put the disc on. Now you just want to make sure that it's tight enough that you hear a little drag on it. Now, when you put your discs on, make sure that you clean them, because they usually come shipped with an oil coating to prevent corrosion. On this particular brakes that I got, they're coated with a black E-coating and you don't have to clean them off. Now that I have the rotor mounted, I like to add a couple of lug nuts to hold it in place. I've put my clips back on my caliper bracket, and now I'm just going to tighten the 13 mil bolts. Before I remount the calipers, I need to do some prep work. So I need to compress the caliper. Now the only reason I have these calipers off is because I'm going to be replacing the brake lines at the same time. Usually I just do this on the car. You take the old brake pad and a C-clamp. Just compress the piston back in. I also have a fancy tool that does it, but this works just as well. Okay, now I take some Easy Glide and I apply it to the backs of the pads to prevent squealing. And I also lubricate the pins with the same stuff. There's these little rubber boots. These go on the bottom side of the caliper. And the wear pad goes on the inside pad towards the strut. I've got my steel clips on my bracket. Now I'm putting the pad with the wear indicator on the back. Tempting to.
This must be good news. For some people, maybe. I'm here to tell you that I'm not the case.
What are you talking about?
I'm not going to do your dirty work for you. Find someone else. Then that's too bad for you, isn't it?
You're talking about patience, Doctor. You forget, I control the fate of the people below.
People will die no matter what I do. So I'm not going to do anything.
If you refuse to complete the research, then there is only one other way.
Okay.
You won't like it.
Caliper, make sure your bleeder's facing up.
Do you understand? I don't give a damn what you do to me.
Suit yourself. I'm going to enjoy this very much.
Sliding pins. Rubber bushing goes on the bottom. And 14 mil to tighten them. There we go.